If you are not setting boundaries as a man, your relationship will fail.
I have no time, no energy, nor effort to put up with people who choose to go against my boundaries. That's family, dating, relationships, friendships. I have none of that.
Someone who's emotionally abusive or even narcissistic might use boundaries to actually try to control you. On the topic of what his girlfriend is allowed to post on Instagram, he says, "I've made my boundaries clear." They might say something like, "I can't be in a relationship with someone who's putting themselves all over the internet like that." But what they're really saying is, comply or I'll leave.
So let me get this straight. I'm the villain because I won't tolerate your disrespect. I'm the villain because I won't let you play in my face. I'm the villain because I don't take all those little jokes as jokes. I take it as shade and I remove myself.
We have a very hard time accepting men's boundaries because to us, men aren't allowed to have boundaries. A lot of people hear the word boundary and they immediately feel offended because they were used to having unrestricted access.
Okay, I have thoughts. Because I was pretty much with the first couple of guys. Like, yeah, obviously you should have boundaries. Family, friendships, relationships. There has to be a point where you can say, hey, I'm not okay with that. Or, if this keeps happening, I'm probably going to remove myself. That seems pretty normal to me. But then we got to that third video, and I was like, okay, wait. Because she does have a point. People absolutely can take the word boundary and use it to dress up controlling behavior. We've all seen some version of, my boundary is that you're not allowed to do this. And I'm always like, your boundary? Because that sounds suspiciously like a rule you just made for somebody else. But then that fourth video swings it right back around again, because what are we supposed to do with a man who genuinely just doesn't want to tolerate something? If someone feels like they're being disrespected and their response is to remove themselves from the situation, I'm having a hard time seeing where the villain part comes in. And then the woman in that last video says something that I think gets right to the heart of why this conversation is even happening. Maybe we actually do have a harder time accepting boundaries from men. Hi, I'm Sage, by the way. And this is what we're getting into today. Because I've been seeing this conversation everywhere lately. Men are talking about boundaries. Things they don't want in their relationships anymore. Things they're no longer willing to tolerate. Things that maybe 5 or 10 years ago, they would have just sucked up and kept moving. And apparently, people have opinions. A lot of opinions. Because almost immediately, you start hearing words like insecure, controlling, toxic, fragile. And sometimes, absolutely. We're going to see examples today where I think that criticism is completely fair. But I also keep thinking, men are allowed to have boundaries, right? I don't even think that should be a particularly controversial sentence. We've spent years encouraging women to get more comfortable saying no. Have standards. Have deal breakers. Stop tolerating things that make you miserable just because somebody else thinks you should be okay with them. And I think that's a good thing. I really do. But if we believe that, then surely men get to say no too. And here's where I think this conversation gets weird. Because sometimes when a man says, I don't want this in my relationship, people immediately start arguing about whether his boundary is reasonable. And I'm not sure we always have to agree that it's reasonable. That's the part I keep getting stuck on. Like, imagine a guy says, I don't want to date someone who goes clubbing every weekend. Maybe you think that's ridiculous. Maybe I think it's ridiculous. Maybe the woman he's dating loves going out every Saturday and has absolutely no intention of stopping. Okay, then don't date each other. I mean, am I oversimplifying this? Because respecting somebody's boundary doesn't mean you have to rearrange your entire life around it. Sometimes respecting somebody's boundary just means believing them when they tell you, this is what I'm comfortable with, and then deciding whether that works for you. You're allowed to say no to their boundary too. And maybe that's just incompatibility, but, and this is why that third video is important, I also don't want us doing that thing where we learn a therapy word and suddenly use it to justify everything. Because I don't want to be in a relationship where this happens and you're not allowed to do this because you're in a relationship with me. Might sound similar at first, but I don't know. Those feel very different to me. So that's what I want to look at. Not, are men right? Not, are women wrong? Please, the internet has enough of that already. I'm more interested in where the line actually is. When is a man just saying, hey, this doesn't work for me? And when does a boundary become an attempt to control somebody else? And honestly, what that woman said at the end really caught my attention. That sometimes people get offended by boundaries because they were used to having unrestricted access to you. That I want to come back to. Because I think there's something really interesting happening there. But first, let's see what some of these men are actually saying no to.
5 things that I stopped tolerating as an emotionally intelligent man. Number 1 is inconsistency. If your words and your energy keep changing, I don't have time to decode it, because consistency is how trust gets built. So if we don't have a foundation to build any trust, then what do we really have? The second thing is emotional immaturity. If every hard conversation turns into an argument, defensiveness, or blame deflecting, I'm leaving, because the reality is there's nowhere healthy for the relationship to go. All that can happen is that communication never fully fleshes out, and then resentment gets built up, and we know how that ends.
So here are a few personal boundaries that I have that I think are very much reasonable that I just want to share with you guys. My growth is not negotiable. If our friendship or relationship cannot accommodate the direction my life is going, so be it. I will not compromise growth for any relationship. The right people will grow with you. The wrong people will expose themselves as you evolve. Don't yell at me. Oh, damn. Don't yell at me. Nobody is going to yell at me or speak to me disrespectfully. I don't care how angry you are or how valid your crash out is. The moment you do that, we're stopping. You come back to me once you're ready to speak like an adult. I don't do situationships. We're either building something or we're not. My time and my energy is not available for half commitments. I am not your therapist. I will show up for the people I care about and support you throughout your difficult times. But I will not be the one to do the healing for you. That is your work. That is your responsibility. I will not compromise my personal plans for your convenience unless it is urgent or you are a priority to me.
I have no time, no energy, nor effort to put up with people who choose to go against my boundaries. That's family, dating, relationships, friendships. I have none of that. Like, my past is what my past is, and I left it there. But because of that past, I established boundaries in my life what I will and I will not deal with. It's just like the no trespassing sign in the front yard. You know what happens when you jump that line? You get shot. Like, metaphorically speaking, you know what I'm saying? But don't cross that line with me. You got 1 or 2 times. I'm gonna warn you once. The second time, it's over with. The second time, I can't do it. You know what I'm saying? Like, one of my boundaries these days is, if you want to run and you want to make it hard to date, I'm not chasing you. Go, do your thing. There's other men out here. There's other women out here. You know what I'm saying? It's not meant for us. All I know is when my wife comes along, dating is gonna seem like a breeze. I'm a courter. She gonna be taken care of. You know what I'm saying? And that's because I choose to, not because she forced me.
Let's start with when he said, my past is my past, and I left it there. But because of that past, I established boundaries. Because that's usually how a lot of this happens, right? You go through something, you realize, okay, I really didn't like how that affected me. And the next time around, you're a little clear about what you will and won't stick around for. And the dating example is interesting because he's basically saying, if you want me to chase you and make this unnecessarily difficult, I'm not doing it. Maybe we're just not meant for each other. And fair enough. Somebody else might love that whole chase me, prove you want me thing. Clearly, he doesn't. And I actually like that he didn't follow it with, so women need to stop doing this. He basically said, there are other men, there are other women, maybe we're not a match. That, to me, is the part of boundaries that gets lost in these conversations sometimes. You don't always have to convince the other person that your way is better. Sometimes you just realize, oh, you want this, I don't. Probably not going to work. And you keep it moving. Now, I will say, the whole you get one warning and the second time you're done thing sounds very clean when you say it on TikTok. Real relationships are usually a little messier than that. People misunderstand each other. People screw up. Sometimes you have to actually talk through things. But the basic idea of knowing what you won't repeatedly tolerate, yeah, I don't think there's anything particularly strange about that. Let's keep going.
Refusing to date someone because they attend clubs every weekend is a valid reason. Personally, I can't. Not at this age, guys. Not at this age.
I wouldn't date a girl that's on OnlyFans ever. Can't do it.
I ain't gonna lie to y'all. Never trust a partner who still communicates with their ex. You heard? Like, you should already know what's going on. Unless they got a baby together, there should be no communication, no friendship, none of that. Like, I'm not hearing none of that. You heard? Word.
All right, so boom, look. If I'm with a girl and she gets a new guy best friend, we breaking up. Because you got to understand, like, y'all ain't just friends, you feel me? Like, if y'all ain't been locked in way back when, sandbox days, hairlines and fat crayons, I ain't going for it. I already know how this go. I done been cheated on before, you feel me? So I know all the red flags, like,
Clearly, all of these guys have their own things that they consider deal breakers. One guy doesn't want to date someone who's at the club every weekend. Another one says OnlyFans is a hard no. Another doesn't trust the whole staying in touch with your ex situation. And the last guy is basically like, if we're dating and suddenly there's a new guy best friend in the picture, I'm out. And look, you might hear some of those and completely agree. You might hear others and think, oh my God, absolutely not. I definitely have my own opinions. Like the ex thing? I think context matters a lot there. There's a pretty big difference between secretly texting an ex at midnight and occasionally speaking to someone you share kids with, or someone you ended things with years ago and genuinely became friends with. I don't think you can just throw every situation into the same bucket. The new guy best friend thing? I can already hear the comment section arguing about that one. Because I understand why somebody might raise an eyebrow if a brand new, extremely close friendship suddenly appears in the middle of your relationship. But I also don't think being in a relationship means neither of you can ever form a friendship with someone of the opposite sex again. So, yeah, that one would probably depend on what's actually going on. But here's what I'm noticing with these guys. For the most part, they're being pretty upfront about what doesn't sit right with them when it comes to dating. And someone else might look at those exact same things and call them insecure or controlling. But if the guy is saying, this is something I'm not comfortable having in my relationship, so I wouldn't date someone who wants that, I'm not sure I see the control yet. Because respecting somebody else's boundaries doesn't always mean obeying them. If you love going to clubs every weekend and the guy you're dating says, I don't want that in my relationship, you don't have to stop going. You can just say, well, then you probably shouldn't date me. And honestly, that's okay. Sometimes a boundary doesn't lead to somebody changing. Sometimes it just gives two people enough information to realize, yeah, we are not compatible. Nobody has to win that argument. Now, I'm about to show you another video, and I have a feeling this one might irritate some people. I actually want you guys to tell me what you think about it in the comments, because this is where I think the conversation gets a lot more complicated. So far, we've mostly been hearing men describe things they won't tolerate. But what happens when, this is my boundary, starts sounding a lot more like, therefore, this is what you are allowed to do? Because the next few guys are about to make that line very interesting. Watch this.
My wife is not allowed to do girls' night out. As controversial as it may seem, that's just what works for us. Another big one, friends of the opposite gender. That's a very sketchy one because you never know the true intentions behind the other party. Although you might have full trust in your partner, could be you're opening yourself up for something that you might regret later. You might not want to do. And although you might say, well, if you trust your partner, then that means they wouldn't do anything because that's really how they are. Because that can influence people's decisions, like what they're drinking, like what kind of day they had with their partner, if it's been a tough day, like everybody does have. If they have needs that haven't been met recently.
I just think that every story we hear about like cheating, it was like those couples that have like best friends, you know, we go out all the time as couples, and then before you know it, like one of them was sleeping with the other one, or like the best friend duo ends up stealing the guy. Like you just hear so many stories all the time. So it's like, if we're gonna have friends, like they're gonna be mutual friends, but yeah. I can't be friends with his friends, and he can't be friends with my friends. Yeah. Like end of story.
And that's
worked out.
That's the dynamic that we exercise, and that has worked for us. for us. It may not work for you, but in a little bit of a blow back on some of the things that I said that I wasn't allowing my wife to do. And a few of them, I guess I could see your point of view, but most of them, not really. The most controversial one is, hey, you cannot have a girls' night out. What's the problem with that?
There's no way your wife should have social media. Social media has ruined the brain of women to such a degree that they can no longer be happy ever. Ever. They think they're happy for a second. Then they go on Instagram and see their friend on a yacht, instantly unhappy, instantly looking at their man like, why isn't he richer? They will never be happy if you allow them to have social media.
Do you allow your girlfriend to have girls' nights out?
Previously, yes. Currently, no. But I'm a provider. What I mean by that is she doesn't work. She has no responsibilities besides day-to-day tasks and enjoying life. So she want to have a girls' night. Absolutely. Go do it. Use my card. Pay for everything. Pay for you and all your friends. The entire night's on me. Be home by this time. Yada, yada, yada. She lost track of time. She missed the curfew. Guess what? There is no more going out.
See, now this feels different to me. Because compared to the men we were watching earlier, I think there are a couple of differences here that tell you we're starting to move away from this is what I am comfortable with and toward this is how I expect another adult to behave. Take the social media one. He doesn't say, I personally don't want to date a woman who uses social media. He says, there's no way your wife should have social media. And then, if you allow them to have social media. That word, allow, is doing a lot of work there. Because now we're not really talking about him deciding who he wants to date. We're talking about a husband deciding whether his wife, another grown adult, is allowed to use Instagram. And listen, I can actually understand part of the concern underneath what he's saying. Social media absolutely can mess with comparison. You can be perfectly happy with your life, open Instagram, see somebody vacationing somewhere you can't afford, and suddenly your perfectly normal Tuesday feels like a personal failure. I don't think that's some ridiculous observation. But social media can negatively affect how people compare their lives, and therefore my wife shouldn't be allowed to have social media, are two very different conclusions. And then the second guy? This one is interesting because I can already imagine people disagreeing with me. If you and your partner mutually decide that one person is going to provide financially and you both like that arrangement, great. That's your relationship. The part that catches me is, be home by this time, followed by, she missed curfew, so there is no more going out. Curfew? I don't know. Maybe it's just me, but when I hear curfew, my brain goes to a 16-year-old getting the car keys taken away. And notice what's happening there. He's not saying, if my partner repeatedly stays out all night, I don't think I can stay in this relationship. He's describing a rule. She breaks the rule, and then he removes a privilege. That's a completely different relationship dynamic. Now, maybe both people genuinely want that arrangement. Adults are allowed to structure their relationships in ways that would make absolutely no sense to me. If everybody involved freely agrees to it, that's their business. But I think this is where the word boundary can start getting really slippery. Because therapy language doesn't automatically make behavior healthy. You can call something a boundary. You can call it protecting your peace. You can say you're protecting your energy. You can probably throw narcissist and gaslighting in there somewhere if we're completing the internet bingo card. But the label doesn't really tell us what's happening. And maybe a more useful question is, who is this actually regulating? If I say, you can't speak to me like that, and if it continues, I'm leaving, I'm deciding what I'm going to do. If I say, you're not allowed to go out anymore because you broke my rule, I'm deciding what you're going to do. Those can sound surprisingly similar when they're dressed up in relationship language, but I don't think they're the same thing. And there's another piece of this that I think gets lost when these conversations become men versus women arguments. People in relationships absolutely influence each other's behavior. Of course they do. You make requests, you compromise, you have expectations. Sometimes you give something up because it matters more to your partner than it does to you. That's not automatically control, that's just being in a relationship with another human being. The question, at least for me, is whether the other person still has meaningful agency. Can they disagree with you? Can they say no? Can they decide that your expectations don't work for them? And if they do, are they free to leave without being treated like they've somehow violated your ownership of them? Because I think that's the thread running through pretty much every video we've watched today. The men who don't want to date someone with an OnlyFans account, they're allowed to say no. The guy who doesn't want to date someone who clubs every weekend, he's allowed to say no. The woman who hears that and thinks, that sounds exhausting, absolutely not. She's allowed to say no too. A woman can have boundaries that a man thinks are completely ridiculous. He doesn't have to date her. A man can have boundaries that a woman thinks are completely ridiculous. She doesn't have to date him. And maybe that's the part of this whole conversation that we make harder than it needs to be. Respecting someone's boundary doesn't always mean complying with it. Sometimes respecting it means accepting that the two of you are incompatible. And I actually think there's something psychologically interesting about how difficult that can be for us. Because somebody else's boundary can feel strangely personal.
I wouldn't date someone who does this. Can very quickly land in our brain as, there's something wrong with people who do this. And those aren't necessarily the same statement. One is somebody describing the life and relationship they want. The other is a judgment about everybody who lives differently. But once we feel judged or rejected, we tend to defend ourselves. Now we're not discussing compatibility anymore. We're trying to prove that the other person's standard is stupid, or insecure, or toxic. Because somehow, if we can invalidate the standard, the rejection doesn't sting quite as much. And maybe that's part of what that woman at the beginning meant when she said people can become offended by boundaries when they're accustomed to having access. Sometimes no just doesn't feel very good, especially when it's coming from somebody whose no you weren't expecting. And I think men becoming more comfortable saying no is probably going to create some uncomfortable conversations. Just like women becoming more comfortable saying no created uncomfortable conversations. That doesn't mean every boundary men set is healthy. We've literally just watched examples where I think the language can start drifting toward control. But we also can't encourage men to communicate what makes them uncomfortable and then immediately ridicule them for having discomfort. We can't tell someone, express your feelings, and then reserve the right to approve which feelings they're allowed to express. They still don't get to control another person because of those feelings. That's the balance. And maybe the simplest way I can put it is this. Everybody gets agency. You get to decide what you're comfortable with. The person you're dating gets to decide what they're comfortable with. You get to say no, and so do they. Sometimes you talk about it and find a compromise. Sometimes one person realizes something wasn't nearly as important as they thought it was. Sometimes you both dig your heels in and realize this relationship probably isn't going anywhere. That's not always somebody failing. Sometimes that's two people learning something important about each other before spending 5 years trying to turn one another into completely different people. And I think I'd rather know. But I'm curious where you guys draw the line, because I don't think everybody watching this is going to put it in the same place. Were any of the boundaries we watched today completely reasonable to you? Were there any that immediately crossed into control? And more interestingly, is there a boundary you personally would never have in your own relationship, but you can still acknowledge that somebody else has the right to have? Because I think that's the harder test. It's easy to respect somebody's choices when they're the same choices we would make. It's a little harder when we think their choices are ridiculous. Let me know what you think down below. And if these kinds of conversations about why people think, behave, and relate to each other the way they do are your thing, that's pretty much what we do here. I'm Sage, this is Maladaptive Variable, and I'll see you in the next one.